Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Florida Native Plant Society Lunch and Learn. Today we have the second in our series about endangered plants with Dr. Patti Anderson of the Florida Department of Agriculture, Division of Plant Industry. She's the botanist with them, and she's ready to present, so I'm really excited to hear what she has to say about hotspots for endangered plants in Florida. Take it away, Patti.
Good afternoon. I'm glad that you've joined us. I hope most of you were able to join us last week for the first session or had a chance to see the recorded version. So we're ready to start part 2 of protecting Florida's endangered plants and a few other categories. Today we'll have a few reminders from last week for those of you who don't have perfect memory, a trait that I share, and for those who are maybe joining us for the first time. Then we'll get into the main topic about where we find Florida's endangered plants, the hotspots for endangerment. And then I've had a question of people asking how to get information about their home county, so we'll have a brief introduction to that. So we had some definitions last week, and we'll go over those. And again, a lot of these are terms or technical pieces of information that I've decorated with endangered plants. I won't really be talking about these species, but I hope you appreciate seeing them in the corner. So we all know native plants are species growing in Florida before Europeans arrived. Many people think that's a kind of arbitrary decision because other people came to Florida, probably bringing plants before Europeans came, and birds could bring plants. The wind could blow seeds to Florida before Europeans came. And I think it would be an excellent topic of conversation at your next cocktail party to discuss whether plants that arrived by birds or wind today are less native than those that arrived before Europeans. But we'll leave that topic for now and hope you enjoy discussing it with your friends later on. Endemic plants are those known to grow within a small geographical area without help from cultivation. Now, endemic is a word that has many meanings, but for plants, we say it's a small geographical area. We might say things are endemic to Florida's Central Ridge or to the state of Florida, but you wouldn't call endemic plants to the Western Hemisphere. So it's slightly fuzzy, but when we say endemic to Florida, we mean it's not found outside the state, growing without cultivation. For the state of Florida, we have definitions of endangered plants. They're in imminent danger of extinction. And we include all the federally listed endangered and threatened plants. So these are plants that are in low numbers and in small areas and big trouble. Threatened plants are also native. They're in decline in the state, but not as bad as endangered plants. We keep them on a watch list so we can monitor the health of the populations. And then we have a special category, commercially exploited plants. And these are plants that historically were harvested from the wild and sold directly, and sold in sufficient numbers to make it likely they could become endangered. So just as another review, if you have endangered plants on your own property or commercially exploited plants, you don't have any requirement to have a permit for the whatever you want to do with those plants, unless you're planning to sell them. So even though it's your own property and if you want to sell a plant species that's listed as endangered or commercially exploited, you need to contact us and get a permit so that when you pass some agricultural law enforcement officer, you won't be questioned about where those plants came from. If you're selling threatened plants, no permit is required. Now, if you're collecting plants from another person's land or public land, and that means 1 or more endangered plants, 3 or more commercially exploited plants, or parts of those plants, you will need a permit from the Division of Plant Industry for harvesting. And that's Form 08051, and you can get information if you search for that on the web. If you're harvesting threatened plants, you always need the permission of the landowner or the administrator of public lands, but no permit is required. So you might want to know who's checking on these endangered plants, who's monitoring to see if threatened plants become endangered. And there's even the case when endangered plants have very healthy populations for some reason and get moved to the threatened list. And sometimes threatened plants surprise us and are taken off the list. And the people who see that, I think of as plant superheroes. Other people call them the Endangered Plant Advisory Council. And they determine if plants should be added or moved from one list to another. And they meet each year, and within every 4 years, every plant that's listed gets a review. So each species is reviewed every 4 years, but not all species are reviewed every year. They use a special form for nominating plants and also for evaluating changes. They meet once a year in Gainesville, and those meetings are open, plants in the sunshine. And here's an example of the ranking system. This is the form that's used. So if you have information about plants, you can fill one of these out and send it in with some documentation of how you know this, and you might want to participate in the meetings if you have information about plants or you have a special interest in our endangered, threatened, or commercially exploited plants. These categories are important because they are added to come up with a quantitative score. Less than 9 means the plant's endangered, and from 9 to 12 means the plant should be listed as threatened. Beyond 12, the plant isn't listed, but it can be reviewed again at any time. Some people ask, why are there so many plant species on Florida's endangered list? There are over 400. Well, one reason is we have a very long state, and we have a few populations of plants that are at the end point of their growing range, whether that's in the north or the south, or even in the middle of the state where it's very high. So, as you might know, Florida is connected in the north to the rest of the continental United States. And we have species in the Panhandle that can grow all the way to the Appalachians. We're also close to the West Indies and Central America as those birds fly or the wind blows. So we have connections to the flora in South Florida with those other countries. And then over time, we know that sea level has changed, and Florida has been very wide and very narrow. And those changes have had big impacts on the plant species that grow here. So we have some small numbers of plant species that are at the limit of their growing range. And then we have pressures internally, mainly related to habitat loss. we have development, new buildings, new roads, new shopping malls, all the things that make our life as comfortable as it is. And as more people come, it encourages the suppression of fire. Fire is one of those natural elements in our landscape. And if it doesn't occur, then there is change of habitats and habitat loss, because the land is no longer livable for the plants that are accustomed to them. When habitats change, we can lose wetlands. A lot of Florida has been drained. When the water dynamics change, the nutrients that are available in the soil can change. That can mean it's no longer a habitable place for some plant species. We find an increase in invasive species every year. There are new things coming into Florida. They could be invasive plants or insects or reptiles, and all have effects on the habitats through the plants. And as all that's going on, we have more development. So it's a kind of cycle that's repeated and increased as time goes by. So that leads us to finally the main thrust of our talk today, the hotspots of plant endangerment in Florida. And there are three we'll focus on. The Panhandle has the Apalachicola River Basin and out to Pensacola, the Lake Wales Ridge and other sandy ridges within Central Florida. And then South Florida, we'll talk mainly about Miami-Dade. And the boundaries of the county are kind of artificial. There could be similar conditions in nearby adjacent counties, but we'll focus mainly on things you'll find in Miami-Dade County. So in the Panhandle, as we mentioned, we see the southernmost reach of plant species that can grow farther north. There are also plants that are just especially adapted to Florida's north and north central Panhandle that grow nowhere else. So the conditions can be kind of harsh, like in the flatwoods. Those are pinelands with periodic water standing on poorly drained soils with limited nutrients. So periodic standing water means sometimes it's flooded and everything's wet. Sometimes it's dry, it's not flooded and everything's dry. So the plants have to withstand drought and flooding. Tough challenge for a lot of plants. A couple of examples you might be familiar with are Heminocalis henryi and Rhododendron chapmanii. Also in the Panhandle, there are what we call seepage slopes. They're slopes that have a clay layer that holds an organic layer above them. These can be pitcher plant bogs. You see Sarracenia species there. The soil is rich in organic matter. It's sometimes called mucky peat. So the organic matter holds water. The clay makes sure it's staying there. And sometimes it seeps because there's water and there's a slight slope. So these mucky soils, even though they're rich in organic matter, because they're so wet, a lot of the nutrients are washing away as the water seeps down the slope. So again, a tough spot, nutrient poor area, which, you know, the carnivorous plants, they're catching those bugs for a good reason. They need some nitrogen. And then we have mesic hardwood bluffs or slope forests. And that's where we see hardwoods and some of our endangered gymnosperms. they're moist, but richer soils than others. And again, I want to point out the form we use with the categories for occurrences, abundance, range of species, protection, degree of threat, because we'll see some of the scores that individual plant species have received. Now, I can have a copy of the form in front of me, but do the best you can to remember the idea. So, a Henry spider lily. It's found in just 3 counties, so very limited range. There are less than 1,000 individuals. It's endemic to Florida, so found nowhere else. And it grows in the pine flatwoods where there are both standing water, droughts, and poor nutrients. So this is a tough customer, and its score is 5, well below the 9 that would make it endangered. Another spectacular plant from the Panhandle is Lilium iridolei, the Panhandle lily. It grows on those seepage slopes where there's mucky soil. It's a beautiful plant. The flower is a bright yellow or a creamy yellow. It has these purple speckles, like freckles on its face, and its petals are curved upwards. They're recurved in the technical terms. And it also has these whorls of leaves along the stem. So beautiful, interesting plant, less than 1,000 of them. They're in 4 counties, but they're also in Alabama. So they have a little wider distribution than just Florida. And their score is 8.5. So still very much an endangered plant. It's threatened by development, the loss of wetlands, and also collectors who might want to have this plant because of its horticultural interest. Another plant of the flatwoods and bogs is this coneflower, the eared coneflower, Rudbeckia auriculata. And I'm sometimes interested to see how the plant name can describe the species. Auriculata refers to ears, having ears, and the leaves of this Rudbeckia at the base of the leaf blade look like little ears. So that's how it got to be the eared coneflower or Rudbeckia auriculata. Sadly, this plant is found in only 1 Florida county. So its score is 2.5, among the lowest it could have. There are less than 1,000 individuals. And we know bogs and flatwoods can be drained. But at least it's also in Florida, in Georgia and Alabama. Now, a plant you're probably very familiar with is Torreya taxifolia, the Florida torreya. It's listed as a federally endangered plant. It's well known because it's been subject to a pathogen. Most of these plants were killed in the 1950s and 60s, and we have a few spindly remainders of what was once a healthy tree. It grows in only 3 counties in Florida, a few counties in Georgia. We have less than 1,000 individuals, or at least the last time it was counted and estimated. So less than 1,000 could mean 100, it could mean 900. So I'm not sure what the number is, but we have a lot of people working on torreya, trying to work both on understanding the pathogen and propagating it in hopes of reintroduction. And I think you have heard a recent Lunch and Learn, or you can see a recorded Lunch and Learn about torreya work. So the score for torreya is 4. And another species that I just like. It's a yellow violet. Now, violet means purple. This one's yellow. It does have a little bit of purple marking in the throat, but it's Viola tripartita. So if you wonder why does it say tripartita, well, tri means three, and this violet has leaves that have three big lobes. It also has simple leaves without lobes, but the three-lobed leaves, I guess, caught the describer's attention. Now, it's only in 2 counties in Florida. So it has less than 1,000 individuals here. And so it has a very low score of 3.5. But as you can see from this map insert, it has a fairly wide distribution outside Florida. It's one of those Appalachian species that just dipped down, put its toe in Florida, and became one of ours. So we want to protect it here, even if it has better chances of surviving outside the state. So Viola tripartita. And now we'll move on to another hot spot, the center of the state, the Lake Wales Ridge. This is primarily scrub habitat where there's bare sand, sparse ground cover. These were ancient beach dunes when Florida was a tiny shadow of its current self, when sea level was much higher and a lot of the state was underwater. This area has some of our highest elevations. The mighty Sugarloaf Mountain, 312 feet. Bach Tower has Iron Mountain, 295 feet. When you're at 10 feet, those look pretty tall. And if you're underwater, they can be a great refuge. So there were a lot of endemic plants along the ridges because when sea level rose, these plants were stranded and had to adapt to this harsh conditions, the heat in summer, all that sand. And then when the sea level fell, some of the plants spread out, but some of them never moved. It's as if they found the perfect spot, adapted to it, and then couldn't figure out a way to change their habits. So they became separate species and are fairly difficult to find well, they aren't found outside this narrow range. So here you can see Crotalaria avonensis, Avon rattlebox. It's a federally listed endangered plant. It grows in the scrub. We have less than 1,000 individuals. It's only in 2 counties. It's endemic to Florida, so it grows nowhere else on Earth than these 2 counties. So it's hard to imagine being much more endangered, but its score is 4.5. If we look at this photo, you can see a little bit of the silvery hairs covering many parts of this plant. That's one of the adaptations that it's developed in response to the harsh sunny condition. The hairs were kind of as insulation, because you imagine the sun shining down relentlessly, the sand reflecting the heat and light upwards to the underside of leaves. So plants that survive there need some special structures. So those silvery hairs on top and bottom of leaves are one, having leaves that are held more erectly shades them a bit. And then having small leaves, so there's less surface area for evaporation, is another adaptation we find for scrub plants. But surprise, there are wet places in the Central Ridge, in the scrub, those low-lying areas that can host plants that do well in wetter areas, but it's still hot there. This is Hypericum edisonianum. It's named in honor of Thomas Alva Edison, who had a house in Fort Myers. We don't know how Edison honored the plant. Maybe he did something to conserve it. I was not able to find any reference to Edison in relation to the plant, but it was named for him. Maybe there was hope that he would contribute to protect it. Now it grows in 5 counties in Central Florida. They're less than 1,000 individuals. So these pond margins and wet prairies where it grows, it can form fairly dense stands. So the 1,000 individuals could take up a fairly large area. So it's an interesting plant in that way. Another plant of the Central Ridge is Lupinus aridorum, arid meaning dry. It's called McFarland's lupine. I should mention, I don't know if I did this last week, but when plants are listed by the state as endangered or threatened or commercially exploited, the name that's in use at that time is generally maintained on the list, even if new taxonomy might divide things into new varieties or subspecies. So for that reason, you see that this is called Lupinus westianus variety aridorum by more modern taxonomists. But we and the federal government call it Lupinus aridorum. It's a true scrub plant. If you look at these leaves, you can't see the individual hairs, but you can see it's kind of shiny, pale green that's it's covered with those insulating hairs. They're fairly upright, not presenting a broad surface area as a means of conserving water. And again, it's only in 3 counties in Florida, nowhere else in the world, and its score in our rating is 3.5. Here we have another scrub plant. You can see the sandy soil in the background of this photo. It's listed by the state and the federal government as Polygonella myriophylla. A more modern name is Polygonum dentoceras. This plant grows in the scrub. You can see how small the leaves are. They're really compressed, almost needle-like, to help avoid losing any of the moisture that is available to it. It grows in 4 counties in the Central Ridge, but it has 3,000 to 10,000 individuals, which on our form gives it a score of 11. So we know 11 is greater than 9. How can this be listed as endangered? Well, it's because of its federal status. And I'm not sure how our plant species get to the attention of the federal government, the Fish and Wildlife Service, but they choose some plants. You know, being a Florida endemic in the scrub might make you a lot more essential to the national flora than a plant that grows across 3 or 4 states that might have fewer individuals. I'm not quite sure how they determine which of our species to protect federally, but I'm glad they did it. And because they do, then we list it as endangered rather than threatened, as its score might suggest. And now we get to southeastern Florida, where we have some more unusual habitats. We have pine rocklands, which are open pine forests over limestone soil. And this soil has lots of open area. I think of it as ankle breaking soil. You know, you can step right into it and turn your ankle before you know it. It's flooded and then it's dry. Sounds familiar. Tough place for a plant. The South Florida slash pine, Pinus elliottii, variety elliottii, is the typical overstory, even though it's sparse. And there are a variety of understory plants that grow in this harsh rockland. Then we have rockland hammocks. They're over the same limestone, but they have more organic soil, and hardwoods have been able to grow. It's sometimes called a tropical hardwood hammock, as well as rockland hammock. And we find a lot of plants that come from the West Indies or from other Central or South American countries. But we do have Florida endemics there, ones that grow nowhere else. And amazingly, Amorpha crenulata or Amorpha herbacea variety crenulata, the Miami lead plant. It's only in 5 locations within 20 square miles in Miami-Dade County. Help that plant. You know, it could be knocked out easily by storm damage, accidental development problems, the bulldozer parked in the wrong place at the wrong time. You know, it's just on the edge. And a lot of people are working to conserve the plant, try to figure out reintroductions, ex situ conservation. But it's like on a plant on death row. It's scary how endangered this plant is. The score is 2.5. So less than 1,000 individuals, all in one county. So it's a beautiful plant, unusual flower. Unlike most legumes, it has a single petal. So a lot of biological interest for this plant, as well as its ecological concerns. Another pine rockland plant is the Lantana depressa, Pineland lantana. It is very similar to the exotic Lantana camera, but don't be confused. Be sure if you are thinking you're buying a native plant that it's a reliable nursery and you are getting the native species, not a yellow cultivar of that other lantana. It's, again, limited to one county. It's happy only on those pine rocklands in Miami-Dade. There are less than 3,000 individuals known to us, and it has a score of 6. The flowers can change to orange as they age or get pollinated. And here's an example of a fern. There's so many endangered ferns, endangered bromeliads, endangered orchids. South Florida is so full of endangerment that it's really hard to choose which species to focus on, just because it's such a tough place for a plant. There's so much development and habitat loss and the difficult growing conditions. So plants have a tough time. You know, there used to be a commercial, it takes a tough person to make a tender something. So it takes a tough plant to live in such a tender environment. But we have stiff star hair fern, and it's a tough customer. Theliptrus sclerophylla. Sclerophylla means rough leaf. This grows in the rockland hammocks, those areas that have more organic soil over the limestone. But there are less than 1,000 individuals found in Miami-Dade County. But it's not endemic to Florida. It's one of those plants that have reached the upper limit, the more northern limit of their geographical range in Miami-Dade County. But it occurs in Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico. Now, this map shows you those islands just to show you how close they are to Florida. But it's not to say that the green shows all the places the plant grows. There might be one or two spots within these countries where you find it. Just as in Florida, we find it only in Miami-Dade County. So it's not a widespread species by any means. So since there are too many species in South Florida for me to choose more, I will give you just those, and in the interest of time, and to keep you from hearing the same sad story over and over, just remember these plants had to adapt to very harsh conditions, and they might not do so well in better conditions, in places where other plants grow, those very adaptations that have led them to survive in the harshest sun or the worst drought or deepest floods could make them fail to compete in more moderate habitats. So on to the question that I was asked, how can I find out which species are endangered in my county? Now, I was afraid I couldn't juggle a PowerPoint presentation and a Zoom presentation and go to the internet. But here's what you do. You go to the Florida Plant Atlas. You can Google Florida Plant Atlas and it will take you to the website. It's maintained at the University of South Florida, and they do a wonderful job of keeping track of our plants, the native and naturalized ones throughout the state. There's a box at the top, a button you can click for advanced search. When you click that box, the screen will change and you will see this screen, search for specific plant species, ... or other search options, look for state listed status. And you can choose endangered, threatened, any listing, not listed. So we'll choose endangered, and then you can go on. Below, you see a list of counties. I clicked on Alachua and said include, so Alachua moved over to the included counties. So you could choose any county or multiple counties. And then you'll see a list of counties that are endangered in the county you chose. So there's several in Alachua County, but I just wanted to focus on a couple of them. Matalea floridana is the Florida milk vine. It's in the milkweed family. It has these spiny pods, hence the other name, Florida spiny pod. It has these really unusual looking maroon flowers. I mean, unusual because of the color, and then the central structure where the stigma is surrounded by these few stamens. It's quite an odd looking plant. It's a vine, and it's ours in Alachua County. We also have an endangered species named for Alachua County where it was discovered, Sideroxylon alachuense. It's called the silver buckthorn or the Alachua buckthorn. Some people will be familiar with the name bully. The species used to be Bumelia, and trees in it were called tough bully or other kinds of bullies. I'm happy now that they're not so much a bully. They have clusters of flowers attached to the stem, but the distinctive feature is this very silvery layer of hairs oppressed to the underside of the leaves. And there's the edge of the leaves are curled under. So if you're in Alachua County and just a few others, you might be able to see this growing in a music forest. It has a score of 3.5. So it's not a very common plant. So now you know the whole story of endangered, threatened, and commercially exploited plants in Florida. So what you gonna do? The state feels we're doing our job by listing the plants and issuing permits. Our role is limited by the state statutes. But other groups, other people, individuals might do other things. They might try to get more funding for endangered plants, for research on endangered plants, for conservation. They might be willing to do some public education. If they learn about endangered plants, they might want to talk to politicians. They might have some other ideas. And I would invite any of you who have some other ideas to write them in the chat box and share them with other people, however you can find a voice. Some of you might want some more information, and I'd just like to point out a few references that are available to give you more descriptions of rare plants or endangered plants. The notes on endangered and threatened plants from the Division of Plant Industry was started by Nancy Coyle. She was my predecessor many years ago. She was here from, I think, 1992 to 2002. And she did this terrific job. And that publication, Notes on Endangered and Threatened Plants, was maintained until about 2010. You can find the 2010 version on our website, but it became prohibitive to print new copies of that publication. But just want to salute Nancy for taking on that job and doing such a terrific, making such a terrific resource during her time. Florida Natural Areas Inventory has a field guide to rare plants. It's extremely useful as photographs and drawings as well as description. Other groups have publications about rare plants within Florida. You can search for them. And if you want to know more about the growing conditions for rare plants and native plants in general, the book Ecosystems of Florida can help you understand better things like pine flatwoods or tropical hardwood hammocks, rocklands, all the different categories of habitats that face our plants in Florida. If you wanted to find the current list of Florida's endangered plants, you can go to the DPI website or search for Florida endangered plants, and you'll get led to our website. You can download a spreadsheet that has the list of current names, or you can search Florida statutes and find the actual listing and the law, the regulation. You can look for Rule 5B40, and that will give you all the information about the state's role. So if you have other questions, you can contact me. There's my email. We also have a helpline. The helpline can answer any number of questions about plants and plant pests. So feel free to call them for many topics related to plants and plant industries. And I can't really leave you without a little song for our plants. Blue or white or pink, but lovely. The vine called for me goes climbing, and when it's climbing, it's really twining, oh my. When it twines, it's like a samba that swings so cool and sways so gentle. That's tenuissima and microdactyla too. Seas are rising, it's not surprising. The vine called Ipomoea keeps climbing, and maybe we should think about climbing too. Between me and you, that's what we should do. Okay, that's your song for today. Thank you all for your attention.
So I asked a poll of everybody who's an audience member, and they say 38%. I asked, are the conservation lands near you fire suppressed? And 38% says it depends on the fire management agency. Depends on the management agency of the land. 29% say yes. 19% say I don't know, and 14% say no. So yes, so I'm happy for everybody who knows what fire suppression looks like, and what it doesn't look like, and what good prescribed fire management looks like. If you don't know, you should go on some Florida Native Plant Society field trips, because most likely the people who are most likely to know what fire suppression looks like in the natural communities in a given area are going to be Florida Native Plant Society members. So go on our field trips and then ask, hey, when was this last burned? Hey, what does this look like? Hey, is this what this natural community is supposed to look like? And then you'll know. Then you'll be able to answer my poll if I ever do a poll like this again. Sorry again for muting myself, everyone. And Patty, I'm sorry you had to listen to me say the same thing twice.
That's fine. You did a good job of repeating. Were there any questions for me?
So many questions. Okay, so Madeline asks, who would be responsible for enforcement on illegal removal of endangered species? And she says Lake Maiden Cane, but of course Maiden Cane is not endangered. I mean, it's an important plant, but it's not endangered. So,
well, if you observe someone taking an endangered plant, which I think might be the reason for the question, you can call local law enforcement. You probably don't want to approach the person and say, do you have a permit for that? But if you can call law enforcement, the person's probably trespassing as well as taking the plant illegally. Now, if the person is on their own property and they're removing, if you see someone digging up an endangered species in their own property, they have every right to do that. So you have to know the circumstances, and you want to first protect yourself from a confrontation that could lead to your personal harm. Because we know concealed carry is an important fact in Florida. So be cautious, but the people responsible would be local law enforcement or agricultural law enforcement.
So say you're driving by on the side of the road and you're observing this rare plant population. Now, this doesn't happen very much in Central Florida where I am, but if you're in the Panhandle, perhaps you're observing, known threatened endangered plant species.
A pitcher plant bog.
Yes, you see a side of the road pitcher plant bog and you see someone digging up a plant. Do you take a picture of their license plate, call the cops?
Yes. I mean, unless you have law enforcement credentials yourself, the safest thing would be either to take a photo or write down the number, somehow be able to identify the person and let authorities determine what the story is.
Would it
because
be helpful
you see
to
an action? Yeah.
Would it be
You
helpful
can,
to
you can,
document like that they are removing, like take a video or something of them removing this endangered plant?
you could, I mean, if they remove it and they take it away, presumably the law enforcement could go and find it at their, where they've gone. But um, I think you first you want to keep yourself as a person safe, and then contact the authorities with whatever information you're comfortable obtaining. So if you start to take a video of someone who knows they're stealing, that might not be the safest thing to do. So just use your best judgment on what's safe for you, and will also have the information for the authorities to follow up.
Safety first.
Yes.
Okay. Wendell Cropper asks, who keeps track of specific locations of endangered plants in Florida? If I find a location, can I tell if it's already known? Is there a system for reporting locations?
We depend on information from a lot of different people. The Florida Natural Areas Inventory is the main source of location information that we use, but we also get information from a number of researchers and other people. There's not an official place to record your information, the sighting of the plant. So we depend more on experts who are doing surveys than individuals reporting an occurrence. So if you think you've seen one in a place that's not documented, say in a county that is not on the Florida Atlas of plants, the Florida Plant Atlas, then you could contact us. You could contact Florida Natural Areas Inventory. You could contact your local extension office, or if you have a university nearby. There's not really a central clearinghouse for individuals to report observations.
And if you're concerned, like if you see a plant species that you're not, like for example, some of our chapters and us as a a statewide organization, we have certain plant species that we have the bandwidth to monitor their populations or are working on restoration projects. So for example, the state, we have Dicerandra modesta, blushing scrub balm, long spurred balm, Dicerandra cornatissima, and do we have any more? And those at the top of my head. And then we also have, like for example, the Pawpaw chapter is working on Asmina rugelii previously.
And don't you have Torreya as
yes, Torreya, right? Our whole Torreya keepers program. So we have those three species statewide. So you can contact me, or for Torreya you can contact Lily. If you see a Torreya, then get in the program, of course. And then, of course, there are some chapters, like I said, Pawpaw chapter is working on that Pawpaw. So, you can contact your chapter. The likelihood that they have a monitoring program on a specific endangered species is not high because our chapters are not big, but that's also an option as well. It's sort of unfortunate there's not one, sort of clearinghouse for this information. You could also go on iNaturalist. You could post on iNaturalist with the location obscured, and there is a project for federally endangered species, federally threatened endangered species, that is monitored by Fish and Wildlife Service.
You can also contact someone on the Endangered Plant Advisory Council. Those names would be available. I won't try to tell you those names right now. You can contact me and I'll tell you their names.
Ooh, Waria, also, that's another one of our focal species, Waria and plexifolia. So if you see a very fluffy little mustard thing, we're working on that as well. Okay, Betsy Harris, who is really awesome, photographer, surfer. You should definitely follow her on Instagram. She did some Barbara's buttons this morning. Ooh, so good. She asks, is there a website that lists the plant's threatened and endangered score and or the known population size information that Dr. Anderson is sharing?
Uh, we haven't posted that on our website, but I think we could. We have a little problem with employees right now. We don't have a web person. And so we've had a few people just this year asking to look at the ratings. And so we thought, sure, we can post it, but it just hasn't gotten done. But the website that I showed on the screen with more information, soon that would have the scores. So just check there later on.
Yeah, and she has a really good reason too. She says the plant atlas only lists its conservation status, but the detailed information could be helpful to groups or individuals attempting to persuade municipalities to protect certain, maybe locally rare species.
Yeah, certainly. And we'd love to see that happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could probably give a better presentation if you had more information on why something was rare. Oh, and here is Deborah Curry, president of our Marion Big Scrub chapter. So if you're in Ocala, you go to her meetings. They're great. She says, Dr. Patti Anderson, you are so informative and these presentations are wonderful. Can we help these endangered plants? Sorry. Can we help these endangered plants gain footing in appropriate yards / natural areas?
Are you talking about maybe collecting seeds for planting in local landscapes?
Well, I mean, so Deborah is already like way involved in our Waria area project, which is up in her area. So, I mean, she knows what it takes to be working on endangered species on private property. But I think it really speaks to like a larger issue of, people want to do something and they want to know, is it okay to plant these species in your property? Is that going to have any positive effect on the population?
It can, as long as your area is a good habitat for the plants to survive. Is it within the range you would expect to find them? So yeah, the state encourages propagation. We allow nurseries to collect seeds with a permit and then sell plants that they propagate. So certainly if you can collect seeds, or if you're part of a rescue, you need a place to keep those plants going. So they just need an appropriate habitat. And if that can be your front yard or a ditch by your house, that's great.
Yes.
Or if you want to propagate them in a greenhouse and then donate them to a park or conservation area, someplace where they would live appropriately, that would be great as well.
Yes, Juliet really likes to point out that your yard is not protected area. You may live there now, but what happens when you move? Not everywhere is like Gainesville with all these native yards around. The likelihood that your house gets sold to someone who doesn't appreciate your landscaping is understandably like a terrifying proposition. And, if you have this massive habitat of threatened plants, there's no, assurance that that's going to be maintained in the future, which is really unfortunate. And, we'd really like to change that, but that's just the world we live in right now, the Florida we live in right now. So, probably if you're propagating these plants and have them, but, have an exit plan for your rare plants, a conservation area, or friends, or I mean, better yet, if your chapter isn't currently having like a propagation program, help your chapter start a local ecotype nursery for propagating stuff that you might be collecting seeds from rescue sites, or you might have. So this brings us to Kaylee's question, which she has a really great scrub habitat on her property in northeast central Florida. She says, if I have endangered or threatened plants naturally occurring on my private property, she asks what permit and licenses she needs to propagate and sell / share / distribute plants.
If you sell the plants, you need our permit for harvesting endangered and commercially exploited plants. And if you just do a Google for that, for harvesting endangered plants in Florida, you will come to our form where you can look at the previous lunch and learn where it's on screen. But that's the form you need. And if you're if you're propagating them on your own property and you want to give one to a friend, you don't need a permit. But if you're selling them, then the permit's required.
Okay. So, I mean, she's great, and I really doubt that she's gonna be digging up all of the rare plants on her property just to straight up sell. So, say she collects seeds and starts a little nursery in the back. Does she get one permit and then it's good for that species that she's working with?
Well, if you're setting up a little nursery, you need to be a registered nursery so
Right.
you can sell the plants legally.
Yes.
And after you register as a nursery with us, then you can propagate the plants, and the permit, I think, is valid. I can't remember if it's valid for 1 year. I think it's valid for 1 year. And then you can renew it every year as you want to continue selling the plants. I'm pretty sure it's just 1 year.
For the endangered plants.
Right. But there's no charge for the permit.
Okay.
You just have to tell us that you're continuing to sell the plants and they're continuing to have a good home.
Awesome. Okay. Miles asks, do any state programs encourage labeling of endangered plants sold at nurseries? Some local native nurseries do this, but it seems the big box stores are missing an opportunity for educating consumers.
I don't think there's a requirement. I mean, as you say, it's a good idea. It would help with public education, but I don't know of any requirement to do that.
And I mean, other than like, possibly poached tillandsias and maybe rare, those indoor little house plants that maybe they take from California mountains. Are big box stores selling endangered plants? I mean, they're not certainly selling Florida endangered plants, that's for sure.
It would be unusual, but it's possible some orchid could get into their trade somehow. But they could sell commercially exploited plants like Zamia or.
Oh, yeah, I mean, maybe. Are there like a Lowe's selling Zamia?
I don't go often to the big box stores myself, so I cannot answer that question truthfully.
Okay. So, I mean,
but they are inspected
mhm.
by state nursery inspectors. And the inspectors, if they saw endangered or commercially exploited species, they would ask for documentation to say that they had been collected under permit or had been produced from nursery stock, not collected from the wild. There would have to be a document trail.
Okay.
If that were to happen. So I don't know that it happens often or never, but we do have a mechanism for following up. So an example from our nursery inspectors is with Zamia. An inspector went to a nursery that last year had no Zamia plants. This year it had 3,000. Where did they come from? It's unlikely they could be the size that he encountered in a year. And so it was discovered there was no paper trail. The person said he bought them from a guy with a truck by the road. So this was all investigated. We have 30 days to investigate, and the plants were seized from the nursery. And then because it could not be shown that they were harvested legally, they were donated to nonprofit groups and given a home. So there is a penalty for selling plants without the proper documentation, and that is that the plants are taken.
No plants for you.
Right.
So, okay, so endangered plants, people who are ethically selling rare plants in Florida would be like Green Owl Gardens has pine lilies. The natives in Davenport have some Lake Wells Ridge endemics. So if you're in that area, you can buy those. And those were all ethically seed collected and propagated and with all the permits and stuff. And then the Million Orchid Project, right, down in South Florida. You can get some orchids there. Oh, we have one last question from Wendell. Asks, what species is the pink flower on the final slide just before the song?
That's Ipomea microdactyla. Or was it tenuissima? It's one of the ones in the lyrics. There it is, tenuissima. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. Okay,
So
well,
I just want to say thank you to all of you who were here and watching. And I have to go back to work now. There might be some permits waiting for me to review.
yes, let's get you back to work. Thank you so much for your time, Patti.
Thank you. I look forward to the next Lunch and Learn. I hear it's coming next week.
Yes, it's Scott Ward with Sedges.
Excellent.
I haven't made a graphic yet, but there'll be an email Monday. Okay. Have a good Friday, Patti.
Thank you. You too. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.